Hi, I'm Reggie Turner. I'm here with Jim Miller and Terrence Moore. The FlipSide starts right now. To the show. Tonight we're going to be talking more about politics. Last week we spent a considerable amount of time looking at the municipal election and some of the concerns in regards to the city. But let's take a broader look starting tonight and look at the Senate race between former Governor Larry Hogan and Angela Alsobrooks. And there hasn't been any recent polling. The last polling has been in June. But what we're looking at is somewhere between an 8 and 11 point race in favor of Alsobrooks as of the last polling in June.
Yeah, that's
Jim,
interesting.
what say you?
That's interesting because and there was only 1 or 2 polls done in June. The rest of them are dating back May, April, March, February. And of interest, so the Hill and Emerson did a poll in February where Hogan was up 17. Washington Post did a poll in March where Hogan was up 14. Goucher College did a poll in March that had Hogan up 4. Baltimore Sun did a poll in April that had Hogan up 18. Then in May, the Hill repeated a poll, and it's also Brooks up 10. Then PPP, I'm not sure who they are, did a poll with Alsobrooks up 8. So
public policy polling.
Public policy
for
polling.
Those keeping score.
Okay. So the Real Clear Politics average is showing Alsobrooks up 9, which surprises me. Frankly, I thought this was in the bag for Hogan.
And Terrence, I'll let you get to this, but from how this race was couched is that if this was a gubernatorial race, many feel that Hogan would blow it away. But running for Senate is a different animal. And one of the major issues that's on the ballot is reproductive rights. And that's one that Hogan is kind of ducked when he was governor, that he really can't duck now. And many feel a lot of that disparity in these numbers that's one of the major issues around that in a blue-leaning state.
Blue-leaning?
Just blue.
Just blue.
Just blue?
Yeah, there's no lean about it, in my opinion.
Well, considering the fact there was a super majority of Democrat in the Democratic legislature here and the governorship, so you're right, it's not lean. Terrence, what say you?
It just feels like former Governor Hogan is a candidate without a party. And I think he doesn't have a solid footing of supporters that comes from that party base. Now, I'm not big on the party system myself, but it is what it is, and it does really help motivate, dictate our politics. Most recently, I was watching one of his campaign ads, and he used the slogan, "People over politics," right? That's an interesting slogan to be taking as a, somewhat, as a former governor, as somebody who's, again, in a party that I don't know if everyone supports him in the Republican Party or even attaches him to a Republican Party as much as they probably would another candidate. And in this era right now, as we see what's happening in June, July, what's happening on the national stage, I think there's some impact that's going to happen here in this race. I think that's going to give Alsobrooks another big swell. And tonight,
because she's been given a platform,
right? Absolutely, and she's running hand in hand with the new governor. I think Governor Moore also stands close with her, and through that race with Trone, and now into this position and where they're at right now. And guess who's going to be standing on stage at the DNC this week? Well, actually tonight, depending on when you're watching this. Yeah. And I think this is also a kind of behind-the-scenes competition between the new governor and the old governor and some people's mindset and even themselves. So it's going to be an interesting race, but I only see right now upside for Alsobrooks. I want to see what Hogan does to kind of start to combat that.
So let me ask you this. How much is Alsobrooks going to be impacted? And I don't think, because of the dates of these polls, I don't think we can measure that at this point. But at the time these polls were taken, Joe Biden was still the Democratic front runner or heir apparent, right, to his own presidency. Now we have Kamala Harris. How much is Alsobrooks going to be helped or hurt by Kamala Harris? I know Kamala's got a big bump right now, and of course she'll get another one after the Democratic National Convention.
Exactly.
I think this gives Alsobrooks another point or two.
Long term or short term?
Well, immediately in the short term, I think Alsobrooks' future is tied to the national race. And I think it's going to be hard for Hogan to thread the needle because Alsobrooks had this much of a lead when Democratic enthusiasm was dampened. So you would conventional wisdom would say when new polling comes out with the enthusiasm on the Democratic side, that she would have even a better opportunity. I think the biggest thing for Hogan, though, in this race is there's a lot of folks in MAGA that are not going to support him and pull the trigger. We talked about that a little bit.
But aren't they? I mean, there's a difference. So here's the problem.
We're talking about lockdown Larry.
Okay.
I'm just saying, but in that case, they would have to not vote.
Right.
And that's anti-MAGA, right? Not voting is.
No, but that's just saying we're going to sit that particular race out. But
are they going to do that?
There is hardcore MAGA folks that will not vote for Larry Hogan.
I don't accept your premise.
And here's the other thing. I think that if polling as we get closer shows a bigger lead, that gives them more impetus of saying, you know what, we're not going to win that one anyway, and I feel more inclined to sit that one out.
Or it could be the other way, where they say, "Oh my gosh, I don't like Larry, but he's not going to pull it out. I better go vote for him."
And that's what I feel. And again, how they vote is how they vote. But if I don't vote, she wins, right?
Right.
If I'm not going to vote for her because I don't want her in position. But if I don't vote, she wins. By not voting, I'm voting for her.
Well, the key in this, obviously, the MAGA.
If I was MAGA, of course.
Yeah, the MAGA Republicans are going to be an unknown. The other unknown, and the important unknown, is the independents. And I don't know how this poll was constructed. I don't know whether it's likely voters, registered voters, whatever the case may be. That data is not available. But you would think that the independents, based on Hogan's track record, unless the independents are strongly, as you say, on the reproductive rights bandwagon, you would think they would break for him.
Right. And he hasn't took a hard line on that subject either. It's been implied because he's ducked it and he hasn't taken a hard line on it. So it's easier to say, you know what, that's how he feels, I'm not voting for him. Different from I want to know how he feels and I'm not going to vote for him until he says something.
Right.
So I think he still controls some of that narrative. So I wouldn't put that as a big hard line. What I would put is independents. These are polls, and we know where polls are. They're subjective to some degree as well. But in the primaries, we know independents didn't get a chance to have their voice heard, you know, if you weren't Republican or Democrat. But I think with Kamala, in this shift between President Biden to Kamala running for this presidency right now, there's also a swell of people who just sat out the primaries, period, that's going to come in on both sides of the party into the voting pool in November, who otherwise wouldn't have.
But the Democratic votes in the state were more suppressed in the primary season.
And being blue state, that's going to come out in her favor some more as well.
Come out in her favor. Here's the other thing. Robin Thicke got basically 28% of the vote in the primary. Robin Thicke.
Yeah.
A lot of those people are not going to vote for Hogan.
Maybe.
If you're going to vote for Thicke over Hogan.
In the primary, that is the key term here.
All right.
It doesn't matter. It's like preseason football. Nobody cares.
Well, There's two predictions that I want to make, and I know we're going to have more, but I want to be on the record. Okay, I want to be on the record for two things.
Okay.
The Washington Commanders will beat the New York Football Giants both times this season. And right now, by my calculations, because I have my handy dandy, Alsobrooks, even when it tightens, she'll be up 6 points outside of the margin of error.
Okay.
I'm on the record with that.
All right. Did you notice that he brought his portable charger because he's planning on giving the calculator a workout tonight?
Who knows? He thinking the Commander is going to beat the Giants twice. I don't trust nothing that comes out of his mouth anymore. But right now I think it's her race to lose, and I didn't feel that way early on. I thought Hogan had the you look at that, his approval rating was still extremely high after he was out of office as well, which is usually not the case, because usually after you get out of office, the next administration blames everything that went wrong on you.
Right. Whether or not it was your fault.
Whether or not it was your fault or not. So you're an automatic scapegoat as you leave office. And that didn't happen. And we've seen approval ratings of the current governor and the former governor pretty much neck and neck. So I thought he had a real fighting chance to take this one. But I think there's been so many things that's happened nationally that has swayed the votes, as well as the rising popularity of our governor now, who is throwing his weight behind her, and his interaction with the national party right now. I think she's coming out on top.
Here's what I'm surprised. I'm surprised you didn't take your victory lap.
Which one?
Because the race shifted against Trone when Moore started campaigning for her. And you said on the show back then that this was really more against Hogan,
right,
in that race, right? Same thing that's going to still continue to buoy her.
Well, maybe. The economy is still not great, and there are more and more layoffs being announced. I'm wondering how the economy over the next couple of months will impact the election generally at all levels, maybe not at the local level.
Well, here's the thing. You have not seen a significant rise in unemployment. You've
seen a rise, though.
You've seen a tick.
That was a big jump.
Yeah, it's a big jump.
You've seen a tick.
Okay.
You have seen a still robust stock market after a one-day downturn 2 weeks ago. The market has recovered all of that.
Okay.
You've seen inflation moderating. You're going to have to see something, a big shock out of the economy to shake up that race.
Yeah, I don't think, I would agree that nothing is going to, actually right now, Fed is talking about lowering rates in September, right?
And that may be off the table and pushed until October or November, based on the fact that the market has bounced back from the quick downturn.
I wouldn't think they delayed it. I think that they would tailor it back to do it more than once, possibly, right? Maybe do something small in September, then do something again back in October. And right now, we're also going to see, like, spending is up right now. This is the time of year it's happening. Spending is up. It's high. So we're going to see some of those impacts there. From the unemployment, yes, unemployment is increased, but it's not at the point of concern. I think more people was concerned how it increased or how quickly it increased when they expected to. And they reacted to that with the market, of course. That was the downturn that we seen in the market back in early August, in July. So I really don't think that anything financially is going to really shake up this race that's going to trickle down and affect this right now. I think it's going to be about getting voters out. I think it's going to be old school politics that's going to happen right now. And we know what happens in September, October, and November. The communities that never get visited by politicians all of a sudden starts getting visited by politicians when they're campaigning, right? So we're going to see a lot of that. And
so Western Maryland's going to see some politicians.
I guarantee you.
When's the last time Alsobrooks was in Western Maryland?
She has not been in Hagerstown. And I talked about this last. She hasn't been in Hagerstown. She's been in Allegheny County twice. She was there for the Democratic Summit, and then she went back for a quick trip for a few hours. But she hit 70, and She bypassed us on her way back through. And Hogan,
Since the game?
well, yeah, Hogan came to the baseball game, but other than that, when he went on his bus tour. So, I mean, neither one of them have been here, but Hogan has a track record here.
Yeah.
He has built-in support here.
And yes, and Hogan needs to win here.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with unemployment, what happens with the economy. Again, you're seeing layoffs, and I know Maryland is still on the low end. We're still at 2.7, right?
Less than 3%. Yep.
Yeah, 2.7% unemployment, even with the nation at 4.0%. But I think that could impact it.
Historically speaking, unemployment is really low.
Yeah,
So just putting that in
but
perspective.
4% is.
Historically speaking, interest rates are low.
Historically speaking.
If you're going back to Jimmy Carter, yeah, that's true. But if you're
Right.
going back 20 plus years, they're not. Right?
20 plus years, they're average. We just went through a period of time where things were extremely below the norm.
But also the generation right now that went through that time, it is their norm.
That's
the
exactly
whole
right.
millennials.
That's
and
exactly
they
right.
concentrate our wealth.
The baby boomers own their home now. They're not worried about mortgages.
Exactly.
For the most part.
Yeah, so
No,
that's
I'm
where
with
the
you
shift
there.
is. Yeah.
No, I'm with you there. I just think that it's a tough race for Hogan because he would have to thread the needle. He would have to have.
Didn't he spend 8 years in the governor's mansion doing that?
He did, but he lost a lot. He lost a lot through COVID.
Okay.
He lost a lot.
But he also left office with what, 72% positive rating?
He did do that, but he lost a lot with MAGA in the midst of COVID.
Okay. You give MAGA a lot more credit than I think they deserve.
MAGA went 28% for Robin Ficker
Okay. In the primaries.
in the primary.
Okay.
Jim, my track record is pretty good on these things.
I see a steak dinner in my future.
So-
You're
so-
buying.
So here we are. After we get through the primary bump that Alsobrooks will probably see on the back of the Harris
Convention.
ticket, right?
Right.
See, yeah.
After we get through that, so if we're talking end of September, that should be gone. Right around October, I still have. That's the first measuring. I still will have Alsobrooks up 6-7 points.
So
outside of
Alsobrooks
the
is going to
margin.
win this, in your opinion.
Unless there's an October surprise for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're going to still get that gubernatorial bump that happens because the governor hasn't been out in support of her as heavily since the primary.
Well, he's been stumping for the ticket.
right, and
right.
he's going to bring those tailwinds with him back here and that energy here to support candidates, and she's going to be the one top of his list. So I agree. I believe something detrimental has to happen between now and then for her not to win. Now, I think it may be a little closer, but because I still think there are a lot of people in this community across the state that really remember the Hogan administration and were fond of it. That 72% of approval rating. That's just not Republicans. That's a large percentage of Democrats when we are a blue state. So there are a lot of Democrats that still like Hogan and may vote that way.
Right.
But when you have issues on the ballot that are decided by the Supreme Court or who the justices are, that changes the calculus of
For some people.
for some, but these polls are suggesting for many, for them to shift to the way that they did and when they did.
Maryland's a blue state. Unless they outlaw reproductive rights, which they didn't do when they removed Roe
But when
v.
you're
Wade.
sending someone to the Senate, you're not just looking at it from your state. You're looking at the national issues.
All
that
politics
you
are
care.
local.
All politics are local, but when you're sending someone to Washington, it's a broader reach.
They asked 100 voters in Maryland how much they care about West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and I bet the answer is not so much.
Go on your social media and watch both sides in regards to how they're ranting and raving about national politics and what is happening in these conventions and who's having press conferences and who is not. It's national.
It's percentage of the numbers. You're talking, yes, there are people who are saying that. There are people who are intimately familiar with politics that are looking like that, who will vote that way. But when you look at the majority of people, I don't think they're thinking outside their state.
But it's the people, for Hogan to win, it's going to be the people in the margins that are going to need to move the needle. And I don't believe he's going to have those folks in the margins.
I think it's going to be the people in the middle. I think it's going to be the people in the margins.
I don't believe he's going to have enough in the middle to move forward.
We shall see.
So
Terrence, we ought to both get a steak dinner out of this.
So we haven't went the full way. I'm saying by the time we get to October, I'm still saying that Alsobrooks is going to be up 6 to 7 points outside the margin of error.
All right.
Then we'll reevaluate.
I agree. Per the polls, you would.
All right.
There we go.
Okay, let's take a break and talk about something else.
Fair enough. Stay with us. We'll have more politics after the break. Back to the show. We've talked a bit about our state and national political scene. Now let's bring it back home to the race that we did not cover last week. We have a Board of Education race, which is considered nonpartisan. I don't believe it's handled that way, but it's called nonpartisan. And the top 8 that are moving on in this race are Victoria Beachley, Peter Bigford, who's an incumbent, Charles Burkett, Ashley McCusker, Robin Spickler, Stan Stauffer, who's an incumbent, Melissa Williams, who's an incumbent, and April Zetmeyer, who's an incumbent, are all in this race, and these 8 are running for 4 spots that are available. Now, in the primary, the leading vote getter was Peter Bigford, followed by Stan Stauffer. Then in third place was Melissa Williams. And in fourth place was Charles Burkett. So April Zetmeyer, who is the incumbent, looks a little vulnerable based off of the primary results. And will have some work to do to retain her
actually,
seat.
she wasn't 5th. She was 6th. Because Victoria Beachley
Victoria Beachley
more votes than she did. Only less than 100, but still, that's significant. And again, as a nonpartisan race, arguably the population that we haven't heard from yet is the independents. And there's a significant number of those in Washington County. Mm-hmm. But I thought that was a fairly interesting result with Zetmeyer not only not getting in the top 4, but being 2 out.
Yeah, and you look at her, her history and connection with Washington County Public School, which she retired from after being an assistant principal at North High in Williamsport. So I think she has the relationships and tons of educational credentials as well. Surprised by where she stood out when she came out on that. Again, I'm not sure where many of these candidates are speaking from as far as what they plan to do and what they're going to support in the school system. We know that education has been politicized more so than ever, going back to what is being taught, what's in the curriculum, and what's not. So I think when you talk about being nonpartisan, it should be, but that's what some of the influence is. And some of the questions are going to be more national partisan questions to these school board members, kind of to try and determine which side of the fence they're going to fall on. And that goes from everything to critical race theory to burning books. You got it all, on a national level. So I'm not sure where many of these candidates stand. I haven't really heard from them. Again, I personally don't have a child in the school system. I've worked with the school system, of course. But I would really want to hear what their stances are. And of course, education is always critical right now. And we've seen it more so after COVID.
I know there's been some forums. I believe the local NAACP hosted a forum where some of the candidates that are probably what you would refer to as Democratic leaning participated in that particular forum. but I haven't really engaged in that. But we're getting to the season where the ramp up of forms, and hopefully, our newspaper does a profile and on these candidates as they normally do. But as short-staffed as they are, they might have to get you to come and help out with that, Jim.
Sure.
And it's back to school season, right? So it becomes even more in the forefront of people's mind as we go back to school and the youth go back to school in the community, and are faced with what that transition looked like getting back into school, some of the things that may come out of there, realizing some of the changes, which may make some parents probably pretty vocal with the board that's sitting right now, which I believe a lot of them, it's their seat to lose in most cases. But I think this is the time, September, October, where the school board becomes a little bit more noticeable when we look at elections. I think we kind of ignored them a lot coming up to this point.
Where should we be from your perspectives in terms of the makeup of the board, business versus former school service resources? I mean, we have Peter Bickford, who's coming from business. We have Mike Guessford, that's coming from business. We have, and I'm just looking at the ones that are going, we have Stan Stauffer, who's a former school teacher. We have Melissa Williams, who I believe did consulting. We have Zentmeyer, that you mentioned was a former administrator. So we have, in my view, we have a significant
diversity of thought.
Melissa Williams actually was a social studies teacher.
Okay.
And developing reading at Clear Spring Middle School.
Yeah. And then you have, and then of the folks that, the other folks, you have Charles Burkett, who was in business. Yeah, I mean, do we have diversity? How many?
In some senses we do, in some senses we don't.
I mean, my concern has always been that, and I've not seen it come to fruition with this particular board, but in the past, there have been school board members who were retired educators who were what I would call one-trick ponies. They want to see, salaries go up, or they want to see this happen or that happen or whatever. And I mean, we all want to see salaries go up, and we all want to see certain things happen, but that you can't be a one-issue candidate, in my view.
Yeah, and I think that issue usually gets pushed off on the teachers union, which they really advocate for, and how friendly the school board members are with that teachers union and moving some of that agenda. And I'm sure the teachers union have put out who they support as candidates as well, who they want to see go forward.
Yeah, what's that, the Apple ballot?
Yes.
That they put out, and I believe that's out. I don't have that information in front of me, but I believe they've come out with their recommended candidates for that.
I'm torn. I believe there's a place for both, right? But I also believe if there is great relationships and communication, then it is not a need either, right? I believe if it's made of a predominantly educators, and you are willing and have relationships with the business community, then you get that insight and you're willing to, represent the community as a whole in ensuring education, because education is just important to business than anything else. It's our workforce, right? Like, it's the future of our workforce. It's what we're going to be paying in salaries. Like, those are the things that happen at a developmental scale in our elementary, in our school systems. And if it's all business, I think, you really have to rely on other people's expertise, because there are a lot of things that happen behind the walls of our schools. There's a culture that exists back there as well that you may not be as familiar with in building the relationship or understanding what the impacts of some of the changes may be. So I believe I like the mix we have. I hope that we do see this be more consistent, that we have a nice, fair mix of and diversity of thought. But if it goes one way or the other, I would hope that the people in position will use other resources outside of their immediate board to move forward.
What are your thoughts about the larger diversity issue on our scoreboard? And I'm not just talking about Caucasians versus people of color. I'm talking about men versus women, old versus young.
Economics.
Yeah, economics. I mean, we have several candidates who are in retirement from their principal careers, and I'm not saying that's good, bad, or indifferent. I'm just asking the question.
I think it's diversity of thought. It'd be great to have diverse and somebody representing every demographic that are impacted by a school system. That would be ideal. But again, there are resources out there to ensure that you can. Again, youth on the board. Again, I don't know everyone's age, but having an understanding of what some of the newer teachers are going through, what some of these newer students and some of the culture or the new generation are dealing with, all that comes into play as well. So I would like to see some of that, but it's who wants to step up and step into this role, and usually it's one of those roles that seems to come with a great deal of experience and maybe less innovation. And not saying that these individuals aren't innovative, but I think someone who has probably less experience that will be qualified for this is somebody who's thinking out the box and can be innovative enough to challenge some of the norms to sit alongside this level of experience.
If we think back to two years ago, all the incumbents won re-election. So it's going to be interesting to see, and I believe all the incumbents were doing well in the primary. So Zedma is the one I keep my eye on because of the fact that she lost some position. She lost quite a bit of position, right? She was down 2 spots.
Right.
And what singles her out more so than any of the other candidates? It would be interesting to me. Again, that's not something that I've followed that closely, but as we get into into forum season, it's going to be interesting to hear more in regards to what these candidates envision and have to offer.
Yeah, Charles Burkett is certainly an interesting candidate from the standpoint of, number one, he was former county commissioner.
Appointed.
Agreed. But he was a county commissioner nonetheless. And also, I think, through his, he's a pastor. He owned a restaurant, so I think he's got a pretty significant Rolodex of people that would potentially support him.
Well, I mean, the primary shows that but again, there's new voices coming into the picture. So, and if you look at these numbers and the fact that independents are coming, you would think it's a wide open race from the fact that 4, 5, and 6, right? It seems like there's 3 people fighting for that last spot.
And I'll throw this out there, and again, it may have nothing to do with maybe a wild card. I'm looking at some of the careers of some of these individuals that were in the school system. This is the generation voting right now for them are their former students.
That's true.
Yeah.
So who knows them better, right? Like this is unique. That if you look at some of this, they have parents. I mean, they are parents.
And now their children are in the school system.
Right, as well. So that's a different perspective, a look of how people really attract.
I mean, there are a number. So for example, let's just do a couple examples. Stan Stauffer was not only an educator, but he was a soccer coach at Williamsport for many years. Very popular guy, right? Peter Bickford, who was not in the school system, but he spent years on the TV with NBC local news as a broadcaster. So you got to think he's got a pretty big Rolodex. Not to mention the fact that he's hooked up with High Rock, which is a very significant firm in our community.
And I think
and some major community events as well.
You're right. I think that shows up though, and when you start looking at these numbers. I mean, any primary indications show that Bickford and Stauffer are safe.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Right. And relatively speaking, it looks like Melissa Williams has a significant gap.
Yeah, and though I am not as familiar with her background, I find her to be a very thoughtful, intelligent woman. So it's going to be interesting to see. I wouldn't want to bet against any of the top 3.
I think the top 3 I see the top 3 as locked in from how I view it. Because I look at this relative to the last race where it kind of went chalk, but that 4, 5, and 6, that's where the action is.
I agree. And if we had to point out a glaring issue that's going on in our school system right now, it's going to be hard pressed to do so. Think about the former election; it was easier.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing right now is blueprint. And I think that still had some transitional issues that they're still working through right now, what that looks like. But that's the only thing that I could see that's on the table as a major topic. Though there's a lot of things we should be addressing.
But Blueprint is coming top down. Like from a school board standpoint, there's not much.
Yeah, but it's about how it feels, right? As a parent, a student, like what's going on, the confusion that's going on behind some of it, getting out communication, how people move. So I think that's what I'm saying. The only thing that's top of mind to a lot of parents, per se, that's political right now, outside of some of the stuff nationally, is Blueprint. I think that's the, I guess, the headline over education right now is what's going on with Blueprint.
Yeah.
Which ties to funding, of course.
Yeah. It's going to be an interesting election. This is certainly one to watch, and I think there's some good candidates here. I think, I have always said, and I know there's always things to work on, but in recent years, I think there's a lot to be proud of in the Washington County school system in terms of what they've done.
I mean, you look at the superintendent search. It seems that was a successful search and has been uneventful from, no controversy around that.
And the last superintendent did an amazing job to the point where we named a school after him, which I 100% support.
Here we go.
So,
well, gentlemen, in the 2 weeks, we've kind of given a broad overview of kind of the races in regards to that. I know that we got some other topics around some other governmental issues. So how about we take a quick break?
And come back for more.
Come back for more.
On the flip side.
Let's do it. Stay with us. We'll have more of the flip side after the break. Welcome back to the show. Gentlemen, from the archives, this article is from June, but it's talking about some of the legislation and changes that we're having here in the state. Governor Wes Moore's administration imposes 338 new or increased taxes and fees. Jim,
well,
you want to jump in on that.
Well, there's been, so all of the talk has been about the significant vehicle registration fee increases, because they've almost doubled, right, or have doubled. So that's significant, but that is just the tip of the iceberg. And there's 338 of them. The one that I thought was there's several that I thought were interesting, but one of my top 5 was the notion that the work zones, they have the camera patrolled work zone type things. That is going to significantly change, and it's not going to be a flat $40 or $60 or $80 or whatever it is. It can be $100 or it can be $1,000. So I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on here.
And is that dependent upon how much you're over the speed limit?
Yeah.
Well, slow down, Jim.
Well, I've never gotten one of those tickets. I've gotten the school zone tickets before, but I've never gotten one of the work zone tickets because I'm usually pretty slow through a work zone. I take that seriously. The cigarette tax increased from $3.75 per pack to $5 per pack. That's a $33 or 33% increase. Counties can collect a fee of up to $55 based on some of the real property recordation processes. You've got surcharges increasing 55% for some civil cases in circuit courts, 56% for civil cases in district courts. Increase from $8 to $43, a 438% increase for filing a summary ejectment for failure to pay rent.
We're seeing that in this community.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of there, right? A lot of stuff going on. And
your Uber and your Lyft.
Uber and Lyft.
Cost you more. It establishes a a per trip tax on transportation network companies.
And the vehicle registration, I'm seeing the numbers now, it's going up somewhere between 21 and 120%, depending on what type of vehicle you drive. And then there's also a potential vehicle surcharge from $17 to $40 per annual. And by the way, we're surcharging electric vehicles $125 now, and $100 for plug-in vehicles.
And these funds are for the transportation budget?
Primarily. It's one
Well,
of the budgets
theoretically.
that out. Yeah.
Theoretically,
Refilling that bucket that's empty.
yes. Maybe we can get 81 expanded.
Well, that's another piece of news that just came out this week, is that all of the funding has been pulled back for our community in regards to the I-81 project. So there is no funds available for that at this
Yeah.
point.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mr. Moore, what say you?
It's tough, right? Like, we got to pay the bills, right?
Right.
We got to keep the lights on somewhere or another. Who these taxes hit is usually my issue. Who these fees are going to be absorbed by is usually my issues. And it just feels like a middle class tax to me, right?
Right.
And those who are outside of middle class, or maybe lower class as far as economically, these could be detrimental. You talk about, your automobile and how crucial your automobile is to so many things in your life when you are below the lowest socioeconomic line and poverty line in some cases in our communities, and now all of a sudden your vehicle registration has doubled, and that may be a little difficult for some people. It's not as easy as all right, it's not that bad. But on the other side, a lot of those dollars also go to programs like our trauma shock center here in our state as well, to make sure we have the first class health care and facilities like that as well. So those things have to be paid for. I think the question is how and who pays for them, and these taxes and fees just seem very concentrated amongst the middle class.
They are absolutely
And if
concentrated.
if you scroll down this list of 338 and you start looking at the fees in regards to journeyman plumbers and limited master plumbers and those type of middle class professions, and just how their fees are going up, it lends itself to the point that you're making, is that this feels like a hard middle class tax.
And the number of these fees that are increasing by 50% or 100% or more is significant. I mean, there's dozens of them that are at the 50% or higher level. Just on this one page, I'm counting 12. 233% increase in fee for dealer 60-day temporary plate.
But again, where is it going from, and where is it coming from? Where is it going? I see some of those come into play as well by the original amount. But again, it's still some big jumps, as you pointed out, all at once.
Yeah.
And a lot of these weren't proposed by the governor, but he allowed them to go into effect. And he's going to have to carry that and what that looks like as well, as people start to feel these changes over the next year.
There are, by my count, no less than 15 fees that went up somewhere between 10 and 12% for hairstylists and barbers, 12% for salon owner license, 12% increase for senior cosmetologists, 12% increase for cosmetologists. If you want to blow dry somebody's hair, you got to get a license, and it's going to cost you 12% more. 12% for nail technician, 12% for hairstylist, 12% for cosmetology, or 10% for cosmetology apprentice, 13% for salon pre-opening inspection.
And that's the population of our entrepreneurs, right?
Right.
Yep. And you talked about the Uber tax and what that looks like as well, and how that's going to translate to possibly even down to the drivers, right? Because money's going to come from somewhere. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's 100% increase for the application fee of being reinstated the privilege to drive.
Yep.
And it's the same percentage increase whether it's non-drug related or drug related. To me, I think as a behavioral modification, it should have been higher in regards to drug or alcohol related as opposed to not drug or alcohol related. But I think when you parse that out in regards to the numbers of 338 in taxes, it's probably a small dollar amount relative to the whole in regards to what these increases look like. But to the point that we're making, this looks like a huge middle class tax, and that's tough. And you know, just depending on where our economy is going to go, we know it's going to be tough from a state standpoint of them dealing with the structural deficits and things that we have.
Is this a ripping off of the Band-Aid, though? Yeah, do everything now.
Right, just get it in.
Early in administration, let's get it in now.
If you're going to do it, you do it in your first 2 years.
That's right. Do it all now.
You take your lumps.
Yes, let everybody live through it, get comfortable with it before they have to vote again. And I'm not just talking about just the governor, but even those sitting right now.
In the legislature that were
right.
proposing most
Absolutely.
of these fees, yes.
So I think that could have been the strategy here. A lot of these were sitting on the table. They kind of lumped them all together. Let's get them out now. Let's do them now while we have, control as far as Democrats as well. Again, that's going to hold the weight of this. Is going to be that it was Democrats who actually did this. Would be the perception of it, and let's get past it.
And I hadn't scrolled down this full list, but even when you look at some of the professions like real estate agents and different things like that, like this is really broad reaching.
Well, and if you buy a car, the car dealer can increase. It used to be $500 dealer processing. Now it's $800. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a significant increase.
And I think the other thing that I don't think we've stated enough, it's not just tax increases, there's new taxes.
Right, exactly.
As well. New
fee for uninsured electrician license. You see a ton of new fees.
Yes.
Or new taxes that are being, it's crazy.
And because these are a lot of license fees and certification fees, this is a population of people that it's going to hurt economically.
It may be a barrier to entry to get into some of these positions or to keep your license.
Which hurts unemployment rates, right? Like these are some of the jobs that people may gear to kind of transition from being an employee to become self-employed or entrepreneur, and now there's a larger barrier entry, even with real estate and some of the laws that are changing right now, what kind of commission real estate agents can actually charge, and that law passed, like that, this becomes people have to decide maybe to leave that market.
There's fees in here for journeyman, new fees for journeyman master inspectors, journeyman inspectors, plumbers, plumbing inspectors, letter of good standing, accountancy, new fee for letter of good standing for Board of Public Accountancy. Yeah, they left no stone unturned.
Well, I think the bad news is if this is the ripping off of the Band-Aid, it's still a slow rip, right? Because what this article says when we look at the kind of the end, even going into this legislative session of 2025, there's still some significant challenges where spending is outpacing revenues, and there's that large budget deficit, and it's unlikely that they're done.
Great.
So,
because we can't cut any spending.
Can we?
I'm sure we can. You can always cut spending. Do we want to cut spending?
Right.
Are people going to agree with spending being cut? And
Right.
then ultimately, who are you going to piss off when you stop?
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting. The talk of this session is, especially for this county beyond, is that there's not much capital money coming out of Annapolis. You may be able to affect change in regards to legislation, but the purse strings are very tight.
And we still don't understand what we know there was an economic hit with the bridge, the Key Bridge, and what that looks like, and those repair efforts that's going to be taking, number of years to actually get up and running. So all that has to be taken into consideration as well.
Well, this is one of those topics that we look at today, but this is just kind of a benchmark because I'm sure we're going to be revisiting this.
Yeah, this was the happy topic, right?
Yeah. We're definitely going to be revisiting this during the next legislative session.
Yeah, and it's probably going to get worse.
Well, that's the interesting thing is how is the legislature going to address the budget deficits going forward? Because there's a lot of tough decisions that have to be made, and I don't believe that you're going to be able to get all the way there just from these new taxes.
Oh, there's more coming.
Yeah.
There's definitely more coming.
But you're also going to have to look at what are you going to cut too.
Welcome to Maryland.
Yeah.
Maryland is a cult, not a state. I think that's what the.
I never heard that one.
Well, I see it on Facebook all the time. I don't know who developed that as a slogan, but I think we're out of time, Reg.
All right. Well, that is all the time that we have for tonight. We hope that you'll like us on Facebook, follow us on X, and send us your comments to feedback@theflipsidetv.com. That is feedback@theflipsidetv.com. But most importantly, join us again next week for another episode of The Flip Side.